All right, let's jump right in. Sometimes history doesn't just whisper, it shouts. And according to our source material, one of those moments happens not on a battlefield, but at a press conference. We're going to unpack this incredible story, a fictional but really powerful dietary revolution set just a couple of years from now, in 2026. It all kicks off with this one single explosive sentence from a fictional Secretary of Health. Today, the lie is over. Whoa. I mean, that's not just a policy change, that's a full on confession. So the big question is, what exactly was the lie? So picture this. It's January 2026 in Washington, D.C. The U.S. government steps up to a podium in front of the whole world, and after 4 decades of telling everyone what to eat, they just flat out admit, you know what? We were wrong. Can you imagine the shockwaves? The entire foundation of what we all thought was healthy eating was about to just completely crumble. To really get the scale of this revolution, we have to look back at what was being torn down. And for most of us, this image is probably burned into our brains, right? The food pyramid. For 40 years, this thing was basically the Bible of nutrition. It dictated meals in our schools, in our homes, pretty much everywhere. So let's just remember what this pyramid told us. Look at that base, the biggest part. It was a massive load of carbohydrates. We're talking 6 to 11 servings a day of bread, cereal, and pasta. Meanwhile, what's up at the tiny little tip? Fats and oils. They were treated like they were poison, something you should only use sparingly. For generations, this wasn't just advice, it was the truth. So why the sudden dramatic U-turn? Well, according to the source, the government just couldn't ignore the numbers anymore. This 40-year experiment had created a public health crisis so massive, it was becoming a threat to the economy and even to national security. First, they dropped this bombshell number at that fictional press conference. 70% of American adults were now overweight or obese. 70%. That's a clear sign that the official advice wasn't just failing, it was making things so much worse. And if that wasn't scary enough, look at what was happening to the next generation. A shocking 1 in 3 American teenagers were now pre-diabetic. The country's future was basically on a collision course with chronic disease. But here's the kicker. The source claims the real reason for the change wasn't just about health, it was about money. The country was at a breaking point. An absolutely colossal 90% of the $4 trillion healthcare bill was being spent on chronic, lifestyle-related diseases. The nation was literally going broke, treating the very problems its own dietary advice had helped create. So the result was this, a complete and total inversion. The old pyramid, built on a mountain of grains, was torn down. And in its place, a new one was built with a base of red meat, eggs, and full-fat dairy. The very things we were told were the enemy, saturated fat and cholesterol, are now called essential and vital. The pyramid was literally flipped on its head. And this quote from the fictional head of the FDA, Dr. Makary, just sums it all up perfectly. We ended the war on saturated fat. It's basically a surrender. It's an admission that this decades-long war against natural fats was a huge mistake, built, as the source argues, on some really flawed science. Okay, so with the war on fat over, a new enemy had to be declared, right? And that enemy was ultra-processed foods. The new guidelines didn't just warn people about them, they completely redefined them. They were no longer considered food at all. They were now called industrially synthesized edible substances, basically things engineered in a lab to be addictive without giving your body any real nutrition. So it sounds like a total victory, right? A complete confession, a fresh start. But the source argues that even in this huge moment of honesty, the government was still holding one card back. There was one final secret they just didn't dare to reveal. And what was that secret? It all comes down to eating frequency. The new guidelines were brave enough to change what we should eat, but they stayed totally silent on how often we should eat. And this, our source suggests, might be just as important as anything else. And here's why this is such a huge deal. Every single time you eat anything, your body releases a hormone called insulin to manage your blood sugar. Now, if you're eating all day long, the classic 3 meals plus snacks that we were all taught, your insulin levels are constantly high. Over time, your cells start to get, deaf to insulin signal. That's called insulin resistance. It's a state where your body basically never gets a break to switch into fat-burning mode or do any important clean. So why on earth would they keep this secret?
Well, according to the source, the answer is, yet again, money. Just think about it for a second. If the government officially told people to eat less often, entire multi-billion-dollar industries built on constant snacking would face total collapse. Admitting that all the grazing they promoted was a mistake was apparently just a step too far.
But the story doesn't just end there. The idea is, since the fictional government stopped short of the finish line, the source proposes that it's up to us to take that final step ourselves. It's framed as a personal declaration of bodily independence, and it's built on three core ideas. Let's break them down real quick. First, separate food from products. It's simple. An apple or a steak doesn't need an ingredient list. A box of cereal does. Second, embrace healthy fats. Don't be afraid of the fat on the steak or the yolk in the egg. That's what keeps you full and stops cravings. And finally, step 3, create an eating window. Just by shortening the time you spend eating each day, you give your body a much-needed break to rest, repair, and reset. And that really brings us to the final takeaway from this whole fictional narrative. It presents us with a choice. For decades, we were all following a flawed map. Now, a new one has been drawn. One path leads back the way we came, toward chronic illness and the hospital. But the other path, based on real food and respecting our body's natural rhythms, leads to vitality and health. The source suggests the choice is finally back in our hands.